I spent 60 years perfecting the art of being who you wanted me to be. I do not say that with bitterness. I say it with a kind of bewildered clarity that only comes after you have finally stopped. Because for 6 decades, I was extraordinarily good at it. I could read a room, I could adjust my tone, my volume, my opinions, the precise amount of space I allowed myself to take up. I knew when to soften, when to defer, when to fold myself smaller so that everyone around me could feel more comfortable. And then, somewhere around 60, I stopped, not all at once, not with a single dramatic moment, but slowly, the way a tide goes out and one morning you look down and the water is gone and you are standing on ground you forgot existed. That version of me, the one who spent decades performing pleasantness, manufacturing, accommodation, apologizing for simply being present, she is officially retired. What I want to talk about today is what comes after that, because nobody tells you about the after. They love the pivot, the awakening, the decision. But they leave out the part that actually requires courage, the jarring, disorienting, occasionally terrifying experience of figuring out who you actually are. The myth of the graceful fade. There is a story we are told about women over 60. Nobody says it out loud, but you feel it everywhere. The story goes, your time of visibility is behind you. Step back gracefully. Become a supporting character in younger people's lives. Take up less space. I watched my mother do this. I watched my aunts do it. I watched an entire generation of women edit themselves into near invisibility and call it dignity. And I understand why. Because the alternative asserting that you are still here, still forming opinions, still choosing yourself is treated as unseemly. There is a particular social discomfort that arises when a woman over 60 refuses to fade. People do not always say it, but you feel it. The slight surprise, the recalibration, the quiet sense that you are not playing by the rules. Good. Good that they are surprised, because the rules were never designed with your well-being in mind. They were designed for everyone else's comfort. And you have spent 60 years prioritizing everyone else's comfort. But the graceful fade is not just something imposed from outside. It becomes something we do to ourselves over decades. The constant performance of pleasantness, the exhausting maintenance of being agreeable and available. After enough years, the mask starts to feel like your face. You can genuinely lose track of the difference between who you are and who you have been performing. That is the part nobody warns you about. The sound of your own silence. Here is what happens when the performance starts to stop. When the noise of obligation and the endless management of other people's feelings begins to quiet down. You are left with a silence that is profoundly unfamiliar. For most of us, the noise was never just external. We used busyness and obligation and the density of other people's needs to drown out questions we were not ready to answer. What do I actually want? What do I actually think? If I stripped away everything I do because it is expected, what would I choose instead? Those questions feel terrifying in the quiet, because the honest answer for a lot of us is, I do not know. I remember the first morning I had no agenda, no appointments, no family member who needed something, just a morning, a cup of tea, and a life that no longer had its usual schedule printed across it. I waited for relief. What arrived instead was something closer to panic. because the blank slate is not the gift it is supposed to be until you have decided what you actually want to fill it with. Until then, it just feels like exposure. Like standing in a room without walls, with no idea which direction you face. That silence is not comfortable at first. But it becomes the first honest conversation you have had with yourself in years. And like all honest conversations, it is only uncomfortable because it is finally telling the truth. The silence is saying, "It is your turn now." Reclaiming the jagged edges. When you spend decades shaping yourself to other people's comfort, you become very smooth. The rough edges get filed down. The opinions that made people uncomfortable get softened. The preferences that seem too particular get quietly abandoned. Reclaiming yourself is not elegant. It is messy and contradictory. You find things in yourself that you forgot were there. Other things you discover you do not actually want. And you realize that some of what you thought was essentially you was entirely performative, and you do not know for a while how to tell the difference. Here is what I have come to believe. The parts of yourself you suppress to keep the peace are often the most essential parts. The opinions that were too strong, the preferences that were too specific, the sense of humor that made some people uncomfortable, the desire for solitude that seemed unsociable, the anger that was deemed unattractive, the fact that you find certain people absolutely exhausting and you never had permission to say so. These are not flaws. These are the jagged edges of a real person. And I want to say something carefully here. There is a difference between the traits that were genuinely yours that you suppressed because they were inconvenient to others, and traits that were also performative, just in a different direction. The woman who decides she is done being agreeable and becomes performatively difficult has just traded one mask for another. What I am talking about is quieter than that. It is sitting with yourself in the silence we described and asking honestly, what is actually mine? What do I actually think when I am not tailoring my answer to what the room expects? The answers are often smaller than you imagined, sometimes much larger. Either way, they are yours. The end of the apology tour. There is a reflex that runs very deep in women of our generation. The reflex to apologize for taking up space. We apologize before we ask for things. We soften our opinions with qualifiers. I might be wrong, but sorry to bother you. We preface our needs with explanations that justify them, as though the need itself is not enough, as though we need a court case before we are entitled to state what we want. I notice this in myself still. A conversation where I hold a strong view, and I can feel the pull to add a disclaimer, to offer an exit to the other person before I have finished my sentence. But I have become aware of it, and awareness is the beginning of the end of it. Because here is what happens when you stop. When you state the need without the preemptive justification, when you hold the opinion without the softening qualifier, when you occupy the space you actually occupy without the reflexive apology, something comes back. Energy that was constantly being drained by self-editing. Attention that was always divided between what you were saying and how it was landing. A kind of presence in conversations, in rooms, in your own life that had been diluted. For so long you had forgotten what full concentration felt like. You do not need to justify your needs. You do not need to apologize for your opinions. You are allowed to simply be here. The architecture of an autonomous life. So what does the life actually look like, the one built on genuine interest rather than obligation and performance? It begins with the simplest question, asked with the greatest honesty, what do I actually enjoy? Not what should I enjoy? Not what am I supposed to enjoy at this stage of life? What do I, when I am being genuinely honest, find interesting, energizing, alive? The answers begin to form something, a shape of a day, a direction of attention, a set of people you want to spend time with, and a different set you no longer feel obligated to maintain. The women I know who have built this kind of life did not all find a spectacular second chapter. Many found something quieter and more sustaining, a dailiness that actually suits them, a morning they chose, a project that is genuinely theirs, a friendship that is honest rather than obligatory. They stopped being background characters in other people's stories, and they became, finally, the protagonist of their own. That is what I want this place to be for you. Because the quiet thrill, and there is a quiet thrill, I promise you, even when it is also frightening, the quiet thrill of living as the protagonist of your own story for the very first time at 60, at 65, at 70, it is real. It is available. And you do not need anyone's permission to begin. The performance is over. And the woman who is left, the real one, the unedited one, the one with the jagged edges and the particular opinions and the genuine preferences, she has been waiting a very long time for this. It is her turn now. If this spoke to something you have been sitting with, please share it with a woman who needs to hear it. And if you are not already on this porch, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of conversation we have here. I am Patricia, and I will see you next week.